So I would like to get started, and if legislators could take their seats, please. Okay, thank you. On behalf of Ann Beekman, Chair of Windham Southeast Supervisory Union, and myself, Deborah Stanford, Chair of Windham Southeast School District, our combined boards welcome everyone to this event. We would like to extend thank yous to the many who have made this day possible. Mo Hart, the executive assistant in our central office. I'm looking for Mo right now.
All the way in the back.
All the way in the back. Okay. She creates magic. If we were to ask for drop-down chandeliers, she'd find a way to create that ambience. We thank the many individuals behind the scenes who created the physical reality of the day. Thank you to BCTV for live streaming today's panel discussion. The recording will also be available on the website for future viewing. And thank you to our colleagues on the board and our comrades in the community who collaborated and contributed the brain power necessary to make this day happen. Before we begin, let's reiterate that our goal is to better understand what Act 73 and all of its present iterations mean for us within our districts and our supervisory unions, and most importantly, what it means for us regionally. At one point, it was suggested that the concerns of each supervisory union are so different that coming together on a day like today would only muddy the waters. Many of us feel differently. If we accept that assumption that we are so divided in our goal, which I assume to be the well-being and education of young people, if we are so divided, how can we ever consider working together, much less consolidating resources towards that common goal? So we are pleased to see Southern Vermont come together for this conversation. We need to congratulate each other as a united community for trusting in our shared values. And now to introduce the many legislators who are present today. And I'm not sure I can go down the line in exact order. So, Senators Wendy Harrison and Nader Hashim. Representatives Michelle Bosloon, Molly Burke, Zahn Easties, Leslie Goldman, Emily Kornheiser, Emily Long, Laura Sibilia, Ian Goodnow. I hope I've included everyone on today's panel. We appreciate your hard work in conceiving a better, more equitable system in Vermont, one that honors the diverse needs of children, a system that supports educators, families, and taxpayers. Thank you for taking the time to meet with your community. Our moderator is Carrie Emmerdon. Many of us have worked closely with her during her many years on the Vernon School Board and on the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union. Carrie has moved on. She is now the elected moderator for the town of Vernon. And as today's moderator, thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you for all attending today. Just a heads up, I'm going to be talking a lot during this first hour about Act 73. I know I probably should be saying H955, H949, give me other numbers, people, Senate 220. But in the spirit of keeping things simple, there's going to be a lot of Act 73. So I'd like to thank the legislators for coming. We are going to ask a lot of questions, but mainly you're here to listen, I think. So don't feel put on the spot to have an exact answer for every single question. There's a lot of unknowns. I'm going to start by talking about Act 73. I want to bring us to what happened last year. So Act 73 was passed by the Vermont General Assembly and signed into law July 1st, 2025. It established a multi-year process for Vermont to transition to a reimagined system of public education featuring larger school districts, a weighted student funding formula, and a statewide tax for education. Additional measures include statewide graduation requirements, a statewide calendar, class size minimums, state aid for school construction, and revised criteria for independent schools to receive public dollars. The legislation laid out a plan for future General Assemblies to implement the aforementioned features. So with this, I'd like to move ahead to Friday, April 17th of this year, and the passage of H955. And I'd like to ask Representative Kornheiser to bring us up to speed on where the House of Representatives have acted to proceed with the updated changes to Act 73.
Thank you. I guess I'm supposed to use this microphone with the whole stand. I want the whole stand. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Emily Kornheiser from Brattleboro. I'm chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, and so I was the reporter on the finance portions of this bill. But my colleague Emily Long down there, long table we have here today, sits on the Education Committee, and so questions about a lot of the education policy are better answered by her, though I'm going to take us through the whole thing. I want to say that before Act 73, before the governor put forward a, I'll say, excessively bold proposal last year, the year before that was a legislative session that was also filled with conversations about education reform and the need for change within the state, both to our property tax system and to educational opportunities for kids. And so while the conversation got some really hot headlines and was quite politically divisive starting last year, this has been a multi-year legislative priority. Right now in Vermont, we are seeing levels of inequity that parallel Vermont before the Brigham decision, before the 90s. The educational opportunities available to kids in our state are tremendously varied and in many cases tremendously inequitable. And so that real dearth of opportunities in significant regions of the state paired with significant problems in the variability and often the scale of our property taxes led the legislature to begin a multi-year planning process to change these things. That was kicked off the year before Act 73 passed and was going to be led by the Commission on the Future of Public Education. That process was thoughtful, deliberate, involved stakeholders from throughout the state, and Peter Conlin, the chair of the House Education Committee, as part of that was able to visit every region of the state and get significant feedback about what direction Vermonters wanted to go, what people see our education system as for, and the benefit of children, as you said, was top of mind for folks. And so we've carried that original conversation forward through the House and the Senate processes, though I imagine that it has not gotten the scale of headlines that some of the drama that the governor has brought to the process has begun. But I just wanted to really start by saying, why we began this process, and to be clear that it was not political pressure from sort of within the building. It really was seeing a very deep need for both Vermont's kids and taxpayers. So over this session, the House Education Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee and really all legislators received feedback from thousands and thousands of Vermonters who overwhelmingly rejected the idea of the forced mergers that were laid out in Act 73. And we also knew that Vermonters all over the state really supported, sorry, wild things are happening inside my computer and I want to see my notes. Okay. Who overwhelmingly supported the move towards much fairer tax reform, massive changes in educational quality, about sort of shared calendars, things like that, the changes that we made to independent school criteria. There was a lot of support throughout the state for many of the pieces of Act 73, but the forced mergers was not one of them. And so the Education Committee, after all of that feedback, took an idea that we passed a few years ago called BUHS that Southeast Vermont is already taking advantage of, which is this idea that we create shared collaborative structures that we now call CESAs in H955. And we use these shared collaborative structures as a tool to make sure that districts have the opportunity. Whoa, it's really just wild in here. I need to do something. I'm sorry. Okay. Back to my notes. To make sure that districts have an opportunity to collaborate much more significantly to meet educational goals. So that includes special education delivery, it includes mental health support, it includes back-end, both technological needs and fiscal needs. A lot of the pieces of quality education delivery that are very difficult to do not at scale, the CESAs, these collaborative instruments, allow districts to do at scale through shared services. And so the Education Committee identified a structure to have these CESAs mandatory throughout the state. Districts are part of CESAs. Nothing happened particularly in our region of the state regarding this because we already have a cooperative education services agency. And use that as a tool to really lower costs in a lot of ways, and I'll explain why. And then said, we need to have more conversations about where we can collaborate even more deeply than these CESAs, and look at places where districts might want to join together to have shared governance. And so set up a system of facilitators. Each CESA district has its own paid facilitator who's a trained person who's accustomed to bringing people together to work through tough stuff and to bring districts together to have conversations about where more collaboration and governance consolidation could happen. And so districts are required under H955 to do that, to come together, to have those tough conversations that frankly they might not have even had time to do over the last few years as schools have really emerged from a major crisis situation with the pandemic, to take the time to sit down together again and to see what greater collaboration would look like. And that process, that sort of brokered process with significant technical assistance that's funded in the form of like extra attorneys and bookkeepers and things like that, all of that is funded through until the next presidential election cycle. So that's just a couple years. So all of that's sort of where the change in collaboration and the increased scale sits on in the bill that went over to the Senate. And from the start of the conversation that we've had about all this, we know that these governance changes need to come before a new funding formula comes, because we need to see real cost savings and we need to see real opportunities to reach scale in order to get those cost savings, in order to put in place the equity of funding that is desperately needed around the state. And so the foundation formula that was part of Act 73, am I going on to, I'm really trying to make this fast, Carrie. It's just a lot of details. In order to have this foundation formula work, which is really our greatest path to both delivering equity around the state and to deliver a new tax structure. In order for that foundation formula to work, we need to see real cost savings. And so I want to explain a few of the ways that we addressed the areas of increased spending around the state, because I think they've gotten a little lost in the headlines. Though if you watched my recent Instagram video, you might have heard me talk about them. Feeling a little repetitive about some of this stuff, and I know that's first for some of you to hear it. So last biennium, before Act 73, before the governor threw down the gauntlet, before of all of that, we took significant testimony about why spending had gone up so much in the last few years and why taxes had gone up so much. It was 5 things. And everyone has their favorite thing that they want to blame everything on, and it's really not one thing. It's really 5 things in almost magically equal proportion. One of them is healthcare costs. And this year, the average premium increase in teacher health insurance rates was 7.3%. This is the first time we've had a single-digit increase in quite a while. And I know it's an increase, but it's a way slower increase, and that's the kind of progress we're looking for these days. And that was a combination of price and cost control actions by the legislature, by state regulators at the Green Mountain Care Board, and by the Vermont Education Health Initiative. That is the organization that sort of brokers the healthcare negotiations and delivers healthcare for school staff. So that included the passage of reference-based pricing and Act 55, which put some cost controls on pharmaceuticals. That reduced costs to the education fund by $20 million this last year and is expected to reduce costs another $100 million over the next 5 years. That was one big cost driver that we were making real progress in addressing. Mental health costs. Huge increased need for mental health costs coming out of the pandemic. A lot of that was funded during the pandemic and immediately out of the pandemic by federal funds. Those federal funds went away. As you all know, the need did not go away, and so a lot of that went to school budgets and resulted in increased spending. The CSAs, operating at a scale that's very similar to our designated agencies, it's HCRS here, should provide significant more opportunities for the district and the designated agencies to collaborate much more closely, to hold the designated agencies accountable for delivering those services well. I see some real nods from folks who know the designated agency well. And to allow us to bill Medicaid in a much more robust way, so we're drawing down more federal funds. Similarly, special education operating at scale means, one, especially for smaller districts that might see a particular need for a kid once every 10 years, once every 15 years, and so might need to contract out that service or build up a brand new service. At the larger scale of CSAs, districts can enter into a relationship with the CSA to meet those kids' needs, resulting in a real reduction in costs because they're not contracting to a private provider anymore, and an increased ability to bill Medicaid in significant ways. Also, we changed the way that Medicaid is going to be managed at the state level for schools, moved it to someone who can do it, a department that can do it much more efficiently and effectively, and expecting to see a lot more federal funds drawn down from that. Class size minimums is another big cost savings built into the bill. I think that one's fairly self-explanatory, so I'm not going to spend too many words on that. And then school facilities was another big cost driver. And there's significant change in how school construction is funded in this new bill that we passed, H955, that should allow districts to invest in meaningful school construction instead of sort of spending a lot of money patching decaying infrastructure, which we know does not save money in the long term, spends a lot of money in the short term, and does not really result in the kind of facilities our kids deserve. We have a lot of schools around the state that have sewage running through classrooms, through basements, just as one point of example. Excuse me. So that is, those are the ways that we address the cost savings so that the foundation formula can work to deliver real results and real opportunities for kids throughout the state, but particularly in some of our districts that are significantly underspending. It is not expected to lower spending or to cut spending. It is expected to stabilize spending year over year, so we are not going to see these wild swings in spending. we will see a consistent and regular growth with a built-in inflator that meets class costs. I can answer more questions about the school construction if folks want to, but I'll say that there was two other pieces to the bill. One was to do the work that was laid out in Act 73 and sort of assigned to us as our legislative homework to be doing this biennium in this year in 955. That included setting reserve guidance so we get a fair funding, beginning work to figure out how we're going to pay for pre-kindergarten in this new system because the existing finance system won't work, making sure that we're funding special education in a way that is fulsome and meets the needs of our kids, making sure that we're defining small and sparse schools in a way that is fair and equitable, making sure we're updating how we fund transportation, and a number of other sort of pieces of financing that wrap around the foundation formula and make sure that every school in the state has, and every school district has what they need to make sure their kids' needs are met. And then the last piece in H955 was updates to the tax changes that we made in Act 73. And these were also sort of our homework from Act 73. And it included next steps to move towards a third classification of property. Right now we have homestead and non-homestead. We added a third category, which was a second home tax. And the goal of that is to levy that tax in a few years once we figure out all the definitions attached to it, make sure that no one's hunting camp is included, no unweatherized cabins are included, no hotels are included, just second homes. That takes a lot of work on the ground. And that we would use that increased tax on second homes in order to lower every property tax, every homestead property tax in the state to the level of the lowest homestead property tax in the state, so that communities like Barry or school districts like Slate Valley that right now are significantly underspending can get the resources that they need without having their taxes go up dramatically. We also did a lot of work in how we, next steps and work in how we reappraise homes. I know that this is a school crowd, not a tax crowd necessarily, but reappraising, every town reappraising on their own results in us not reappraising our properties often enough and not at a level that we can really look at the statistical significance of variations. And that means that while we have a statewide education tax, we don't really have a statewide grand list, and it results in incredible inequity and really a very unfair set of property taxes town over town. It also means that everyone blames the CLA, the common level of appraisal, for like every problem in their taxes. And the CLA is just a tiny bit of math. It doesn't deserve all of that blame. And so we're fixing that. There's a third portion of the tax changes in Act 73 about significantly changing the property tax credit system to make it much more fair so that it can grow and change over time as incomes go up and as property values go up. But we didn't actually need to do any work on in 955 to make that work. That was just sort of finished and tied up with a bow in Act 73. So this is all multi-year work. I hope I've laid out the first 3 years that have led to it, but we really have another 3 years in front of us in order to fully realize the goals. And so it's step-by-step and iterative. We don't have all the answers up here, not because we haven't thought through your concerns, though I would love to hear new concerns, but because this really is work that we need to take one step at a time carefully and in communication with all of you. So the bill left the House. It has just arrived in the Senate. The Senate had a joint hearing, which was fun to spend a few minutes at. And we have another probably month of the legislative session for the House and the Senate to come together and then to find something that we can move forward with the governor. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. So now we're going to pass it over to Senator Hashim to tell us what's happened in the past 5 days.
Sure. Thank you. So hello, everybody. And Representative Kornheiser is always a tough act to follow, but I'll provide the general landscape of what's happening in the Senate. So as we just heard, we just received the bill recently, and there are a lot of concepts in there that aren't necessarily new to us, but the Senate's position is currently one that is at odds with the House bill. And what I'm trying to get at here is that all of the wonderful policies that you just heard about, all of those are subject to change over the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'm not saying that they will necessarily change. Personally, and I've made this very clear to the chair of my committee, the approach that the Senate is taking is not the approach that I currently agree with. Our current approach is one that really entertains forced mergers as the path forward, and essentially laying out 2 years of voluntary mergers. And it's possible that if the Agency of Education approves it, that the different districts may receive a certain amount of money to aid them in merging, but that's a may. And I believe the maximum is $300,000 per district if they voluntarily merge. And then after that, after the 2 years concludes, then it will go to the State Board of Education in consultation with the Agency of Education to figure out what districts to merge. And the goal will be to have 10 school districts per supervisory union. And there will be, the idea currently is to have 12 SUs and I believe 19 SDs. And the SDs will largely be in the Chittenden County area. And so over the last 5 days, as we've been looking at the bill, members of the committee have not exactly expressed what parts that they support or don't support when it comes to the House bill. It's largely, it's almost been like I don't know if this is a good analogy, but it's almost been like a poker game. Nobody's trying to show, how they feel about certain parts of this. I'm not sure why that is, but I think that especially over the last several months, we've gotten more and more evidence and feedback about why forced mergers don't work. And I know Senator Harrison was on the redistricting task force, and perhaps you can touch on that as well. But what the studies have shown in the reports that were provided from the redistricting task force is that forced mergers in rural areas do not lead to the outcomes or the cost savings that is being alleged by the administration. The only evidence that I could find where forced mergers were useful were in Philadelphia, where they took 6 schools in an area that had 400,000 people and merged them into 4 schools. Obviously, we don't have that same type of demographic and urban area. So that's really where we're at the moment. The timing of this forum is really interesting to me because over the next 2 weeks, a lot of things may change, and the decisions that are made in the Senate over the next few weeks are really going to impact how this bill moves forward. So I know we got a lot of great information, and I hate to introduce more anxiety and stress due to the uncertainty that comes from the Senate, but that is currently where we're at. And I strongly recommend watching very closely what happens in the Senate, especially the Senate Education Committee, and make sure that you're reaching out to your senators, or rather, reaching out to your friends who may live in other districts and have them reach out to their senators if you want to, encourage the progress of some certain policies here that, ideally are in the House bill. So I'll just leave it at that, and I'll pass it back to you, Carrie. I'm not sure who's going next here.
Thank you. So this always makes it interesting when the intros answer a lot of the questions we had already written. So I'm going to skip around from my regular thing. I want to start with this. Can someone explain, or try to, if you have this answer, who will actually make decisions about our local schools under this new legislation? And what authority will current boards lose? What's it going to look like in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years? Anyone?
Oh, it's already on. I'm always happy to have that conversation with folks. Anybody who's been through the Act 46 process, like I have and many of you have, you'll remember what we called 706B study committees. I have been a school board member for longer than I care to even admit here. since the 90s. And I've been through quite a few iterations of this type of change. But to go specifically to that question, it is all of you. It is our local communities, our electorate, our voters, our communities who need to be engaged in this voluntary process that we're setting up through study committees that will be formed when this law, if it passes in the manner in which it left the House. So it will be locals who will be making the decisions on what our districts will look like down the road.
I'm going to add a little bit. And so I think really want to highlight what Emily said, that decisions around governance, the shape of governance, that is all continues to sit entirely with local voters and with districts in this construct. Decisions about, I regularly have folks write to me and ask me for like one particular piece of curriculum that they think everyone needs. And I really like keep on reminding folks that decisions about curriculum are also deeply local decisions. What will change, and the one piece that will not sit with districts anymore, will be how much money they spend. There will be local districts, local budgets, crews, local boards, local superintendents and business managers will still decide how the money is spent, and actually have more freedom on how the money is spent in some ways than they do now, because sort of a patchwork of grants will be made much more flexible. But the actual amount of money that's spent will be much more decided by the state. It will be a block of money for each student with additional money for the needs of each student. So if a certain number of kids in this district come from economically disadvantaged families, then that would be a larger sum of money that would come to this district to spend. The district can then also decide to spend 5% over that with the vote of the electorate, but it is bound to 5%. And then there's a separate mechanism if there's school bonding that I'm not going to get into right now, but there is a separate mechanism for school bonding. But the goal of that is to make sure, one, that as we move towards a foundation formula, every legislator in the state is tied to a community and to a school that absolutely needs for that foundation formula to stay full, meaningful, and enough to educate our kids. If we allow districts to spend too much on top of it, then some districts will be able to vote in that extra spending just like they can now, and other districts won't. And we will see a divide and a divide and a divide, and that divide will matter to some communities and will not matter to others. And so we've really limited the amount of spending on top of the foundation formula that's possible.
Any other comments on that subject?
I just want to, I'll just add again one more thing. Anyone who's listened to me talk about this, it's pretty clear to me that folks are not, they don't fully understand what the foundation formula actually will do. And there's a lot of the foundation formula, which Emily can talk about at length, that is still to be determined. But going back to how we fund and deliver our public education system in this state, the education for our kids, it's undergoing a significant, I like to call it, philosophical shift. And so the way I describe it is currently today, we as school board members, our community members will ask our school boards will ask our administrators to draft a budget that is based on students' needs. And we've been doing that for many, many years. And we also ask them to do it, this is very typical, to do it at a cost that taxpayers can afford. Down the road, when Act 73 is fully implemented and the foundation formula is in effect, that will shift. So we will be creating budgets within the parameter of what the state is allowing each of our districts to spend, and then we will place that fund, those dollars, based on the needs of students then. So dollars first, students second. And I just want it, the money that the foundation formula will provide is designed to provide with weights all of the needs that our kids require to get a good education. But it is a different way of actually budgeting, and I think it's really important for people to understand that. And you won't be voting on your budgets locally anymore.
That was
not the way
going to
we
be,
do today.
that's my follow-up. So how would the development process for a budget work on the local side? And then who is voting on these?
So the budget would be decided would be approved by the school board the same way it is now. It just wouldn't take that unless it had additional spending. We call it supplemental district spending. It would not go to a vote of the electorate. If the electorate is upset with how that school budget was developed by the school board members, those are elected members that can be held accountable in all the ways an elected member can. But the actual sum total of the budget will not be decided. Communities can still have meetings to discuss the budget and where that money is spent. We have a process that we set in place in this legislation 955 to implement something, to implement intra-district equity as part of the district quality standards. That's something that some school districts do now to ensure that the resources that are needed throughout a district go where they're needed rather than where, say, the loudest voices might be. So that's going to be an important process, but that's also just sort of part of district quality standards. That's not a mandate, a formal, strict mandate from the state. And so all of the decisions about, again, how the money is spent within the district is between the board and the staff at the school, final approval by the board.
Okay, that's news. Following up on your conversation about reference-based pricing, you mentioned it could take 3 years to actually see additional. So does that mean school boards, in working on their budgets, are going to have to wait 3 years to see a major cost driver come down?
Leslie, you want to get that one? Or do you want me to?
You do it.
Okay. So reference-based pricing is a very cool way to lower the costs of healthcare. I'm not going to get into all the details of how it actually works, but it essentially sets to some degree spending caps in certain arenas with certain insurance providers. If we could implement it tomorrow, but if we implemented it fully tomorrow, our hospital would likely close, and I think we all like our hospital. I mean, maybe we don't. I'm glad our hospital is there. I don't want to speak for you. We have multiple systems around our state that are very fragile right now. Schools and school funding is not the only one. And so we want to make sure that we go slowly so that everyone can adjust to this process. So it was going to be a piece by piece with the reference-based pricing implementation. So we'll see more savings every year. It won't just be in the third year we'll see all the savings. Okay. So we have to wait a few years for everything to be fully realized, but we should be seeing change at each step along the way.
So we've learned that the budget process will change for voters. What can you tell us about the governance structure of the new plan? Can we talk about the size, the composition, the election process for boards?
That's you, Emily.
Sure. So there's quite a lot that is still to be determined. So when we passed out of the House Education Committee our version of 955, which the Ways and Means Committee amended with the financial aspects of this, the way it left our body, our committee, was that study committees would be formed. We have the CSAs, as I'm trying really hard not to repeat a whole bunch of what Emily already said in the very beginning, but CSAs are mandatory and will be formed, 7 of them in the state. Within those CSAs, there will be facilitators are available in each of those CSAs to support study committees that in the end, the Education Committee decided to create a model map. It's not a a formal map that anybody is required to stick with, but there's a map that folks will look at and say, then you will organize within your region and have meetings to decide to create study committees. They may look like the map that you have probably seen. It's a map that's colored that we produce in our education committee. So we have that map. But it's not required that folks will form study committees within the map that we place there. You know, we didn't want to, in the education committee, make decisions, local decisions around who should merge with who should have conversations with who. We thought that was best done locally. So down the road, if study committees are formed, that will happen at a local and region. I would suspect in Windham County, because we're all here in Windham County, I would suspect that we probably will have one meeting first in Windham County and say, hey, we've got 4 SUs here. What do we want to look like in the future? And start there, and then from there create study committees outside of that one county, within that one county, to decide, you know, how we're going to be governed down the road. So that's essentially how the system will work.
And Emily, my understanding is that the pieces of statute that shape district governance and district votes, you left all of that unchanged from current law, right?
That's correct. And again, we felt it was better to use the model that was already in statute, which was what the 706B, it was what we used in Act 46 to create the study committees, and within that process that's already in statute, locals will even be deciding what their articles of agreement will be. And we didn't restrict that in any way either. And I think that was a really important part. We had a lot of testimony in the Ed Committee that people wanted to be able to create their own articles of agreement around their own study committees and their own newly formed districts. So that's already still in place as well.
As a follow-up there, when you say locals will be in charge, are you talking the electorate or are you talking school board members?
The study committees will be made up of school boards across the new study committee. I'll just say, I can't call it a district yet because it'll be a study committee. Might encompass many of your different school districts.
All right, so it's school board members, and again, there is not a vote of the electorate around.
There is a vote of the electorate, but I'm saying the study committees will be made up of school board members, which everyone elects.
Okay.
So.
All right. Staying on the CESA topic, so the Collaborative Education Service Agencies, I understand that they are required. I understand that districts are required to join them. What is to force a district from fully utilizing them?
So CESAs, which are cooperative educational service areas, that used to be BUHS. We're familiar with the BUHS here. Boards of Cooperative Educational Services. We formed one in, actually it's most of Windsor and Windham County that encompass our CESA today. The CESAs are mandatory. The 7 of them are mandatory, and being a part of them is required. What you will have local decision-making within your region, within your school districts, will be what services you will buy from those CESAs. So they're very similar. I think you'll hear a lot of folks who are pushing back on the CESA model. You will hear folks say, they're just another layer of governance. I've heard the governor say that. I've heard the AOE say that, another layer of governance. They're actually not a layer of governance. They're actually administrative service entity as opposed to a governance entity. And so you will be able to purchase, for example, you'd be able to buy into special ed services, or you'd be able to buy into professional development. So you would do that regionally. And that is, and has been proven over the years in other states to really be a cost saver, to share transportation costs across the district. You know, a lot of business office, you can merge together to do business office things. So that's the idea behind a CISA.
Okay, thank you. Up, Wendy.
Thanks. Thank you. I just want to add more about the CISAs because we did talk about that a lot in the task force. And my understanding, and I hope that this is still the case in the existing bill, is that they're not a policy board, and that's really important for everyone to understand that they're not policy. So what they are intended to do, and I think we should have done this years ago, is have contracts. For example, like there were issues with transportation in our district last year, just a few months ago, and part of the problem is we all have separate contracts for transportation, and if we had one contract or worked with our regional transportation providers already, again with a contract, we can get better rates and more reliability if we work together. So that's the reason for them. So they're supposed to be a help to the districts, not at all a regulatory body.
Okay, thank you. Emily talked about the changes to the non-homestead tax rates and shifting the tax burden. Have any estimates been done on how much money are you expecting this change to add to the education fund?
Yeah. So we're not expecting to add significantly more money to the education fund. We're expecting to be stabilizing spending in the education fund, which will slowly grow, but to be using the resources that are here that are in the education fund right now as effectively as possible. There is a really great report from the tax department that it's really like one of the best reports I've ever read in my legislative time. So if anyone's like, really want to read a report, top of the list for you, that describes exactly the processes we'd need to go through to move to a second homes tax. And they provide estimates of how much it would cost, how much higher they would need to set the rate for second homes in order to either lower all the homestead rates in the state to the lowest rate, or to entirely cover what is functionally the income adjustment or the property tax credit. I don't have those numbers at my fingertips, but I can look them up right now if that's helpful, Carrie.
No, that's fine. Well, because we're all going to go home and read the report
It's a
later
really
tonight, right?
I know that I'm a very big nerd, but it's a very good report. They did a very, very thorough job, and that does not always happen in a democratically controlled legislature with a Republican administration. And this was like just thorough, conscientious, great work, and I just want to praise them whenever I can.
So pulling back to a bigger level, ultimately, education policy should center on students. Can someone discuss how this transformation aims to expand opportunities for Vermont students, whether that's career and technical education, advanced coursework, or extracurricular activities?
I can add a few, and then maybe we can go down the line on
I
that.
was going to say everybody could probably speak to that. I'm happy to, too.
You all want to give your top two?
Yeah, I love that. So I run one of the Governor's Institute programs in the summer, and talking to kids, especially in some of our much more rural districts, I'm really excited for the opportunity for them to be in school districts that are collaborating enough to be able to go to the prom and to have teams that are large enough to field for the sports they want to play. But the big win that I see is using the CISAs for special education services to make sure that all our kids around the state are both having their federally protected rights met, and it's being delivered in a way that is caring and sensitive to the particular needs of that youth.
So, as I had described earlier, the CISA concept is not in the Senate proposal at the moment, though I'm hoping that it is part of the Senate proposal here in the coming weeks. What I will say is that the cost sharing is, I think, one of the main aspects that we hear about, and actually the special education, I believe, is the most expensive aspect of how we pay for education, followed by the cost of health insurance. And, really trying to figure out how we can expand the opportunities for students to gain access to different programs that may not be accessible in their immediate area. If we're expanding the ability to go to different districts or go to different parts of an SU to access a CTE or access a certain program that's at a different school, I think that those two are my main points.
Thanks. So we have kids, a lot of kids are not going to school, as I'm sure many of you know. There's an absentee problem that we have. So to the extent that this can help that, which I would expect it to do that, that would be huge. And part of that is mental health. And so we really need the supports for mental health. And then I'm not sure how to say this, but just kids getting a good public school education is really important to me. So hopefully we're going to talk about independent schools and private schools, but a real solid public education is critical.
So I was very concerned before this bill came out about the potential for mandatory consolidation. And we, as you know, we're having this tension with the governor over this. And I was really relieved after the task force met in the summer that they came up with a proposal to use CSIS as a way of joining together without having to have these forced governance models. So I think there's just lots of opportunity there to think creatively about what could you share, how could we move together. I've been on the transportation committee, and one of the things that we've talked about in the past is how can schools pair with public transit organizations, and how can we be more efficient that way. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for sharing transportation, for more unified contracts, different things like that. So.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zahn Eastis, and I won't be able to tell you what my favorite one is because it's already been taken down the road here. But I will speak to the notion. I'm on the Human Services Committee, and I will speak to the notion of the opportunity that I see going forward is, as we consider the entire state and the education opportunities for all of our students in the state, there's currently a pretty big hole in the pre-K sector. Not all the way across the state, but there are holes in the state where opportunities aren't available for children. And so there's an opportunity as we stabilize the system and make it more clear across the state that we'll be able to then bring, I hope, the pre-K system across the state because we know that the brain is so developed so early, and some of the major portions of our personalities and our understandings of the world are developed even before we get to kindergarten. So the importance of Vermont being able to make those kinds of investments seems like here's an opportunity for us to be able to move in that direction. I'll be watching for that.
Hey everyone, I'm Ian Goodnow, rep for Brattleboro Windham 9. Very grateful to my fellow legislators who are so knowledgeable on this because they're on the committees of jurisdiction or have the experience of time spending in local communities on school boards, which I do not have. I just want to put a giant asterisk on this conversation again, that everything we're talking about has to do with a bill that came out of the House and it could change drastically. So I'm speaking to that bill, and we could see what will happen in a couple weeks. But for me, the big things are the conversation that I walked into when I started my legislative career last session was about inequality in schools and opportunities for students across the state. What I see in the bill that we passed this session is forcing communities across the state to actually sit down and have conversations around access to resources and programming for students. For me personally, I think technical education is huge. The landscape of education and students and what they're trying to get in the future is changing. And I think, and I grew up and went to Essex High School, which had like a pretty remarkable technical program that I know a lot of students that were pretty nearby did not have access to. So I see this, hopefully Nutter can make sure it gets out of the Senate, and I see this being able to solve a lot of those concerns, and hopefully it will keep moving.
We'll start with ours. Thank you. So I'm Michelle Boslin. I represent Windham 3, which is Westminster, Bellows Falls, or Rockingham, and Brookline. And I guess I would have to say a lot of things have already been said, so I'm going to pick a new one. And that's the ability for local communities to continue to have local control, in particular, keeping smaller schools open. I've heard people in the State House say, oh, if you don't have at least 150, 200 students, that's too small. Especially when you're talking about an elementary school, I don't agree with that. I have a school in my district that has about 100 students, and it's about 5 miles from another elementary school. And a bigger elementary school is not necessarily a better elementary school. You know, if the towns would work together and decide that they want to merge, great. But you know what? It needs to be the towns and the people in the towns and the board members that are representing the people in those local communities that get to make those decisions. My grandchild went to an elementary school with 17 students when it closed, and it was heartbreaking. And financially, it probably made sense to close that school, but there's a big difference between a school with 17 students and a school with 100 or maybe even 80. So I think letting local communities continue to have say in determining, are we going to keep our school that's the heart of our community or are we not? That's really important, and our bill has that in the form that we passed it out.
So I will say the main reason why I continue to focus on education, and I have served on education in the House, and I've been on my school board for so many years, is because I am always determined that every child in the state of Vermont, hopefully beyond that, has equitable access to a high-quality education. And they don't all, and we need to make sure that they do. I also want to sort of follow on Michelle's comments that, you know, regardless of the size of the school, schools can provide an excellent education in any form to some degree, but equitable access and high quality and the type of education you're able to provide is often more variety at a larger scale. But on the other hand, I still really feel strongly that local communities really need to make sure that they have a voice in what their town schools and their regional schools look like. And that's why I really supported this volunteer process that we're going through down the road. I also wanted to mention something that was alluded to here, but actually I want to read a sentence out of the bill that left the House. One of the things I feel really strongly about are regional middle and high schools. I think we should, and we've talked about them many, many times in our committee. We were not ready to actually require them because we wanted to go into a volunteer process. But what we did put as language in the bill is that the study committee shall also explore the advisability and feasibility of a contemplated new unified union school district operating regional, middle, or high school, or both. A regional middle or high school contemplated pursuant to this section shall offer resident students increased educational opportunities and access to career and technical education, And that is something following on Ian's comments too. I believe every middle and high school should have career tech programming, every one of them. And I think we can do that if we create some regional high schools and more access to it. So I think that's really important. Lots of other thoughts too, but I'll give it over to Leslie.
Hi, I'm Leslie Goldman from Windham 3, along with Michelle. I wanted to thank Emily for her summary of reference-based pricing. I work on the healthcare committee. I would have gotten too weedy, and so I love that she's able to do it, so thank you. But I think the point is that there needs to be, and I'm hoping CSAs are the role to have ongoing pressure in the healthcare sector of reducing prices and therefore reducing premiums and costs. So I'm hoping CSAs get very active in that area. And the second thing, and I agree with everything everyone said, one thing that I haven't heard yet is summertime. A lot of kids don't really have access to things in summer, food, engaging activities. I think it's important. I remember during the pandemic, I was driving along on the Westminster West Road, and there was a truck, and they stopped, and they were handing out food to kids, and kids were running to the truck, and I started to get weepy. So I think we need to do that and think about a year-round impact of CSAs.
Laura Sibilia from Windham 2, a longtime school board member in Windham Central Supervisory Union, no longer, and my children went to school in the Windham Southwest Supervisory Union. Two opportunities that I see. One is to have larger conversations through this voluntary CSA program. I have watched the unintentional, I believe, creation of public elementary school deserts happening on the western side of Windham County through the good intentions and best possible actions that local districts were able to take in terms of managing costs and quality. So I think this gives us an opportunity to have bigger conversations and make more intentional decisions in our region. I will also say I think I am most excited and most supportive of this because of the opportunity for more accountability, where I think we have been sorely lacking. The Brigham decision, which was 30 years ago now, clearly stated that the obligation to ensure substantial equity of opportunity for all of our students was at the state level. We tried to provide that through a funding system, which was flawed. Those of my colleagues who have been in the legislature for a while will know that I fought that loudly for many years. People were harmed. And so I think getting towards having a voluntary-ish process as close as we can to local, bottom up, but getting to larger governance units gets us to a place where it is much harder for the governor and the legislature to ignore the fact that we have sewer running through some of our schools. And so I want to give a shout out actually now, because she does not get one very often, to Representative Kornheiser, who I disagree with on many things, and including some of the things in this bill. But she has really embraced looking at wholesale change. And I appreciate the governor setting that down as a goal as well. So I think it's what's necessary. I don't think we are there yet. And that's it.
Thank you. So I have one final question before we move to audience participation. Vermonters have heard about controlling education costs before. With Act 73, how will success be measured, and what specific evidence gives you confidence this will be a stable, sustainable solution for students, schools, and taxpayers over the next few years?
So here we are in a capitalist system, and it will constantly tend towards inequity. That is in its sort of, physical nature. And so we need to be vigilant for that, right? And education finance systems, quite sort of famously across the country, need to be reconfigured every 20 to 30 years because they tend towards inequity. Every piece of Act 60 and every Band-Aid and piece of duct tape that was put on that took away from some of the original intent towards equity in that piece of legislation. Every carve-out made by every individual legislator with power just to meet their own needs of their district, not thinking across the whole state, eroded the equity in that system. And that will happen again. That is the nature of the world and of politics. And so the pieces that we have built into this are many to try to fight that, but electing good folks is also an important part of that. So Laura spoke to the accountability of strong school boards towards that. That's important. The numbers in the foundation formula, which many times last year were attempted to be politically negotiated, both downwards by both the governor and in certain arenas negotiated upwards by the Senate, are scientifically derived from educational finance experts based on local Vermont data about our students, their needs, and how much things cost here. And by sticking with sort of the best science of modeling that foundation formula and how much costs increase for certain student needs, and by not allowing politics to shape those numbers, we're making a big step forward. And I think it's really important that we continue to protect those scientifically derived numbers year over year. Another way that we are ensuring equity and consistency in this, I described already, it's the real significant limits on how much can be raised locally. Over the last 5 years, we've done a tremendous degree of analysis in the legislature about why some districts spend more than others. And the only thing that we can find correlation with, not the needs of the students, not the geography, not the political makeup of that district, the only thing that we can find is how much that district spent the year before. And so by bringing us all a real sort of, rising tides lift all ships with the foundation formula, I hope that folks can feel sort of the fruits of that opportunity and continue to protect it into the future.
Other comments?
Thank you. I'll just briefly say a few points here. Yeah, I know that one of the many critiques of Act 46 was a lack of follow-up and in reporting as to how merged districts actually started performing and whether or not they were saving money as they were as it was intended to. And I think, actually, I know that regardless of what path these policy changes take, whether we stick with the CESAs or we water down the Senate version or keep the Senate version, whatever ends up happening, there has to be longer-term accountability, but also reports back that analyze whether or not the intentions of the policy actually led to any results that improved outcomes for students, but also contained costs for Vermonters.
All right, so we're going to move to questions from the public, if people have them. We have 2 microphones in the aisle. If anyone would like a microphone brought to them, raise your hand. And for anyone on Zoom, raise your hand and wait to be recognized, then look for our acceptance to unmute so you can ask your question. So, questions, please identify yourself. And remember, civility is not a sign of weakness.
She knows me too well. Jody Normanford Dummerston, and I want to thank Nader for his comment just now about Act 46, because that's part of the comment. I have many questions, but that's part of the one that I want to talk about. We went through Act 46. We did our study committees. We did our votes that were required. And the State Board of Education and the AOE just considered them nothing. The votes meant nothing to them. And our towns overwhelmingly, every town, Brattleboro to Vernon, voted no to merger. And we got force merged. And I see this study committee in this program, and I was watching one of the representative education meetings, and I'm not sure exactly, because I didn't go back to listen to it, but the chair of that board made some comment about the study committee was the end-all of that. And I want to make sure that the study committee is not an end-all, because our study committee wanted to vote, but the towns did not want to vote. And I want to make sure that this legislature says that the town has a legal right to vote, and that it's not the study committee that makes the decision, and it's not the State Board of Ed or the AOE, it's the voters in the town. So can someone answer that question for me? Thank you,
Ruby. The voters of the town will decide the final consolidation, and that's anticipated to be the next presidential election that November. It's sort of set up so that that election would be available.
Yes, and I could also add to that, because Jody, we both went through this, so you know that. Act 46 actually did have a process at the end of it that allowed the state board to force the mergers in the end. There is not that process in this law, not as it left the House.
Yeah, right.
Next question. Oh, Dan.
Thanks. Dan MacArthur. I'm the chair of the Marlboro School Board, also a member of the Windham Central Executive Committee with Rich Werner and Emily Long, et cetera. First of all, thanks to Deborah and to Ann for initiating this today. I think it's wonderful. Just a wonderful representation of the people that they have invited. Thanks to the two of you and to all of the legislators. I want to pick out Emily and Nader as both my representative and my senator for being on House Ed and Senate Ed, and thank you both. Your voices are appreciated, and I urge you to continue to be, what were you not supposed to be, Jody? You're supposed to be civil but be strong, right? Also, Michelle, I want to thank you for your statement about local voices and local control, because that was much appreciated. For those of you who don't know, the Marlboro School voted just slightly over a month ago to close its little school. We were going to have 46 kids, pre-K through 8 next year, and the voters made that decision, and that's what's crucial about this, is that with good information, as much good information as we had, which is not great as we can see today because there wasn't much to be predictive about the future, but the voters decided overwhelmingly to close the school because they felt like that was in the best interest of the kids of the region. So a couple of things that I think are really important about using Marlboro as an example is, the information and the voting all took place in Marlboro. We have at this point, we're still a district that governs our own educational system, and we were able to do that. We became non-operating, and those of you with whom I communicate will know that I'm going to continue to repeat this, that non-operating school districts does not mean that they're non-functioning, dysfunctioning, or should be forced to merge or close down. They're just as important as operating school districts in terms of allowing the local voters to make decisions about what happens with their kids. One of the concerns I have is that we said to the voters in Marlboro that if we become non-operating, they will be able to choose amongst the public schools within the geographical region to send their kids to. Some kids live, a mile from Rich's school in Dover, and if they choose, they should be able to go there. I am greatly concerned that any merging that takes place of anything, independent of CSAs, they're not going to be a governance structure, but any other governance structure could make it such that our kids who live a mile away from the Dover school would not be able to go to the Dover school because they became a blah, blah, blah. You guys know, you can understand where that's going. And I just want to finish up by saying, Emily Kornheiser, I appreciate the foundation formula. Marlboro has been one of those school districts that spent so much last year and then spend a little bit more this year, and we've done that, and we have been in the penalty phase for the last few years, and I don't think that our objection to any of what's happening at the state level has to do with the funding. We'll happily accept the money that comes. We'll figure out how to do it as long as we're the ones who figure it out. So anyway, thanks so much for listening.
Additional questions from the audience? See what that comes up.
Hi, I want to echo the thanks again for convening the meeting and legislators that are here. This is wonderfully informative and also an opportunity for us to weigh in. My name is Bill Conley. I'm from Dummerston. Very long-term public school teacher. I teach English learners, multilingual learners in Windham Central. And I travel around to the very few students that are in Windham Central District. So with CSAs, I'm very interested as a multilingual learner, advocate, and teacher, how that model will help them, because we have very few in Windham Central, and Brattleboro has a lot of great teachers and administrators and expertise, and I'd like to see how those forces can work together, because I'm going to be retiring very soon, and I want the best for those kids. The other question I have is for Nader and Emily. How do we? What I hear from Emily, I really like everything I've heard of coming out of the House. And Nader, I think you're giving us some warning signs, perhaps, of what might happen in the Senate. And I'm wondering how we can advocate as citizens for that. One more question. Well, if I can't remember it, that's it. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I've tried to write to the governor, email the governor, handwrite letters to the governor to, not take this action that he's threatening. And I'd like to know how that might best be done going forward.
I'm going to answer the governor question and maybe a little bit of the House Senate question, and then maybe someone else can answer the English language learner question, which is also a great one. So there are like a lot of sound bites in politics, right? And so, you might be hearing something I say on Vermont Public, it's not VPR, something I say on Vermont Public that was maybe a 30-minute conversation I had with Pete Hirschfeld, and you get 35 seconds of it. Governor says all kinds of stuff at his press conferences that seems genuinely really just designed to antagonize us. Sometimes kind of funny ways, actually. He had some good snark this last Thursday. But the actual workings inside the legislature are really not very divisive for the most part. There's a regular meeting that's been happening every Wednesday morning for 2 years. That is me and the chair of the House Education Committee, the chair of the Senate Education Committee, the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, the governor's main political staffer, the commissioner of taxes, and the secretary of education. And we've just been meeting every Wednesday to say, where are we? Where are we going? Can we find common ground? And sometimes those meetings are terrible. They're the worst way to start the day. And sometimes they feel hopeful again. And I think, yes, everyone is trying to catch each other in a political trap, 100%, and it's an election year. And so the rhetoric about what we're doing might not always match the reality of what's happening. And there's not really all that much we can do about it. And often, sometimes, I might have really strong equity around rhetoric and sufficient spending, and I might not even use it because I want the governor to sign the bill and think that he's getting something even if he's not, right? However, we do have another month. The governor has invested as much political capital as he invests in something in this, though it was not, frankly, all that much political capital that he's invested in it. Could have gone around the state and actually talked to people about this. But he does want to say he won. And one way he can say he won is by signing whatever we send him. And we might want to frame it as him winning in order to get him to sign it, even if it looks almost exactly like what we described for you today. And it's after he signs it that we can all talk about what it is, right? I didn't brag about the second home tax before he signed it. I bragged about it after he signed it. So I think that's an important piece of context. And I just want to make sure that he has threatened to veto both the budget and the yield bill. The yield bill is what sets property taxes. If he vetoes the budget and we don't have a budget in July, Vermont has no mechanism at all for a government shutdown. None. Food stamp payments wouldn't go out. Medicaid payments wouldn't go to hospitals. Nothing would, state police would not be required to work. We have absolutely no mechanism for a government shutdown. And we would likely fairly immediately lose our bond rating, which would result in increased borrowing costs into the future. So even if it was resolved fairly quickly, it would have long-term costs. So that's what happens if we don't have a budget on July 1st. And then if we don't have a yield bill on July 1st, there is a mechanism in statute, but the default mechanism raises non-homestead property taxes by a huge order of magnitude, and we would essentially over-raise revenue by hundreds of millions of dollars, and that would be on the backs of Vermonters. So neither of those situations is a good one. And frankly, the legislature usually loses a game of chicken with the governor because we are more interested in governing than he is most days. And so I just want to it makes this all really scary, and your voices telling us to hold firm on what we know is best for our communities is really important for us when we're going up in those negotiations.
So I'll touch on the Senate piece briefly. I think that really one of the most effective things that folks can do is write to the senators on the committee with expressing your points and getting into as much detail as you can, actually, because sometimes we get the emails that just say vote no on bill, insert whatever number, and the first question I ask is, okay, why should I vote no on this, or why should I vote yes? And so, but whenever I get the emails that, even though it does take more time to read, when I get the emails that actually lay out sound arguments that cause me to think that maybe I'm approaching this the wrong way, or maybe I need to reassess. Those are very helpful in swaying people's positions, and yeah, I would say that's one of the most important things that folks can do. I am the only senator from Windham County on the Senate Education Committee, There's 6 of us on there. There are 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. The chair is Seth Bongartz from Bennington, and the other folks are Senator Keisha Ram Hinsdale from Chittenden, then Senator Terry Williams, David Weeks from Rutland, and then Steve Heffernan from Addison.
And I just wanted to add, the governor's threat to veto the budget and the yield is due to the fact that we didn't create a map to force mergers. I'm really disappointed in the governor for doing this. And it has been very clear that the House, and I'm hoping the Senate will follow suit, that we listened to the feedback from Vermonters. We heard loud and clear that Vermonters did not support forced mergers. And for the governor to hold the budget, and you heard all the reasons why, that this is pretty outrageous that Emily just shared with you, and the yield bill hostage to try to get us to go over what the Vermonters have been telling us and force mergers on the state is just wrong to me. I really struggle with how come we're even in this place. And I'm going to encourage my colleagues to stand strong on this and continue to listen to what Vermonters are sharing with us, and allowing and trusting a process that we put in place that gives Vermonters voice and the authority to make some of these decisions on their own first. I'm going to turn this over to Michelle because she wants to talk about that other piece.
Okay, so I'm going to say one small thing about your question about what can help to impact the governor, and I don't know that this really will make a difference, but I would say that I believe it's pretty fair to say that the governor has won election and re-election year after year after year because he gets the votes not only of Republicans, but also of Democrats. So if, not to be too political, if you are a Democrat and you have voted for Governor Scott and you feel like you could say to him, wow, I voted for you in the past, but you're making me really mad now, that might make a difference. If he got a whole bunch of messages like that, I would think that might make him think. But that aside, that wasn't my primary thought. My primary thought was I wanted to actually address how second language learners might be able to be benefited through the CSAs, through the CSAs. So my understanding of this kind of arrangement is it can work in lots of different ways, but one of the ways that it can be really effective is through sharing specialties. So that could include special education. If you had a nonverbal student that needed a speech therapist to work with them on some kind of intensive skills, but only 6 hours a week. Well, hiring a specialist 6 hours a week is going to be very expensive. And hiring one person who might be a speech therapist or might be a second language educator, that person could be shared between the different schools. So maybe you have 2 kids that are second language learners in the school in Dummerston, but you've got more of them maybe in Bellows Falls, but you don't need to be with them all for the whole week. So you would divide up, your one position would be divided up among these different schools that needed you. And that would be true in many different areas, not just second language learning, but that would be one of the places where it actually could be really effective because you don't necessarily need to be there. Some of the times the student's going to be in the mainstream classroom with all the kids the rest of the day. And sometimes they're going to need that special extra support from an educator. So I believe that it could actually work really well. And happy retirement when that comes.
Any other comments from the panelists? All right. Any other comments from the public?
I think this goes well with Michelle's comment just now. I'm Mary Howard Hall. I represent Grafton on the Bellows Falls Union High School Board and the Supervisory Union Board. And our little teeny wonderful elementary school in Grafton that's K through 6 has a community meeting on Wednesday about closure because we're down students too. But I'm asking a question for all of us about teacher contracts. And I hear us talking about students, and we're talking about administrations and the BUHS, which now we're calling CSAs. solving, perhaps you just answered it for me, are CISAs going to be in charge of contracts? I mean, these teachers with these mergers potentially are going to have to travel from where they are now to a new school where they could be working. And there's so many unintended consequences, it seems to me, with the mergers. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the teacher side. Thank you.
One of the conversations that we've had over and over and over again, actually, about district mergers in particular, is that whenever sort of two collectively bargained units join together, generally you're scaling up the salary and the benefits to the higher one. That's great for teachers and school staff. And there are many areas of the state that are not able to pay their school staff at a level that they can retain them, and they have almost entirely folks on the thing that happens, provisional. Thank you, that's the word inside my brain, provisional licenses. And so that would be amazing in those areas if they could afford that. And there's a real concern that if we move to 6 districts around the state, that we would be scaling up budgets in really significant ways that we think maybe the governor has not entirely counted for in his projections. The CISAs are not going to have, are not going to be bargaining contracts. They might have a few staff, a few shared staff, but it would be, it's still districts who would be doing all of those negotiations and those contracts.
May I ask a follow-up? So you just mentioned the CISAs will have staff. Who's paying for that? How is that money funded?
So CISAs, members of CISAs will likely have a fee to be members, and then members choose to pay, and this is the way the current one operates right now, the one we're in right now. So we all buy into the model on a scale that is commensurate with the size of our districts, RSUs. But then you pay for the services that you choose to use out of that CISA. So that's how it operates.
And the state is providing funding for half, for a half-time director at each one, just to get them started.
That's right.
To get them started?
Yeah.
Okay. So year one, half the costs are covered.
50%.
After that, it will be on the school districts that are required to join the CISA.
It will be. I think one of the things that I want to remember in these conversations is that as we shift resources from district to district, or between the district and the state ed fund, or the ed fund and the district, it's all the exact same pot of money and all the exact same tax base. And I think sometimes that gets a little lost in the wash, that whether something sits at the district level budget or the state level budget, it all shapes our tax rates in almost an identical way.
Mm-hmm.
Jody? Oh, yes, yes. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, Mary Gannon. I always feel like in Vermont spaces, I have to say I live in New Hampshire, because I do. But my heart is over here, my work is over here, my daughter was born over here. And New Hampshire's a mess right now in terms of what's happening in schools, so I guess we could do a comparison of that if we wanted to. I want to pivot just a little bit, and I'm wearing my NAACP hat today, so I'm one of the vice presidents for the Windham County NAACP branch. And we also work very closely with the Human Rights Commission. But before I ask my question, I want to appreciate this board and this district under the work of Superintendent Spino, his staff, and also the school board members, because this district has prioritized school culture and issues of hazing, harassment, and bullying as part of their work. And I feel like this is a conversation when we talk about what's really happening to our kids, and I appreciate you talking about what's happening to teachers, that we don't talk about this when we talk about education transformation. I feel like what we talk about is like it's a business, and we're trying to figure out how to run the business better. but we're not thinking about who's being served by it. I have spent a better part of the last 30 years in educational equity in this state trying to work with our schools and our districts to improve school culture. And unfortunately, we are at epidemic levels in the state right now. We have reports coming in weekly to our branch and to the Human Rights Commission. A lot of reporting, of course, around race, which has been chronic in the state. Also, kids with a range of different disabilities experiencing harassment and negative behaviors. And also kids who describe themselves as non-binary in terms of gender identity. And kids living in poverty. So we could go on about the kids who are being impacted. And some of you know that what happens when schools and districts are not dealing with that is that when parents feel like they have no recourse, they go and they file a lawsuit. And we just had that happen in Windham Central. Some of you may have seen that news where that district was sued a significant amount of money because of ongoing harassment that wasn't being addressed. So I could go on about this, and I think what is lacking in the conversation is what is going to happen to our kids with these merged districts. And I have gone to the Commission on Future of Public Education. I have attended every school redistricting task force meeting. I sit on those calls. We try to raise those questions up in the chat, and we get no responses about that. And a lot of you know me, so you know that this is a real important issue. It's to my heart, but it also really matters to the state because we're losing families because of what's happening to kids in our schools. So my question is to all of you, and I'm not sure that you can answer it, but I'm going to pose the question. I'm going to ask you to think about it. That I'm really curious how you imagine this bill, as it stands right now and as it moves forward, how this is going to actually create more welcoming school spaces for our kids, and how what's happening with education transformation in the state right now is going to decrease the reporting we have of hazing, harassment, and bullying. Thanks.
Thank you for that question. In addition to thinking about Windham Southeast when I do this work, I think about Barry City, Slate Valley, and Winooski. Those are like my touchstones around the state. If I need to go deeper, I go to the Kingdom, a few other places, but in my work with the Governor's Institute, I regularly meet kids who have come to the Governor's Institute, and it's the first time they've been in an educational setting with a second kid of color, or a second non-binary kid, or a second kid with any identity that matches theirs. And I know this room has a lot of people who feel a deep affection for small schools and small districts, and I respect what that means for communities, but it is not good for these kids I'm meeting at Governor's Institute. It's good for a lot of kids. And so one thing, when we talk about scale, I think about those kids and what that means to just have one person that knows what your life is like to some degree related to your identity. When I moved to Vermont, I met people who thought Jewish people had horns. Not like in a judgy way. They just like thought that was true and that was cool. Like, it's fine to have horns, just thought you had them. So there's that. I think that's one way that scale matters for equity, because it's lonely being a kid no matter what, right? The second is that a number of years ago, we passed, it was H1, it was educational standards related to diversity, culture, equity, right? And those are in statute now of our education quality standards. They were very carefully negotiated. They're a big deal. And yet the capacity of different schools and school districts to implement them is very varied. And part of that is because the Agency of Education is not providing professional anything really anymore in terms of guidance, support, development. And the CISAs are really imagined to be a very explicit tool for professional development. And this is one serious area and arena of professional development. So those are a few ways that I see this work making a big difference and opportunities for kids in our schools to feel safer and more welcome, and for families. But I think there are many more that my colleagues could speak to, but that's where I'm going to stop for that.
So I'll mention that we have recently been working on a bill related to chronic absenteeism, and the main conversation has actually been around hazing, harassment, and bullying, and the impacts on mental health, and how we can make sure that the students who are avoiding school out of a fear, a legitimate fear for their safety, or because of the impact on their mental health due to harassment, making sure that they're not being penalized by the absentee system, and that they're not being categorized as truant, but that there is a different process that isn't necessarily punitive, but that allows the school more opportunities to connect with the student, figure out what's actually going on, and connecting with the family and trying to figure out what's going on there, rather than just going straight to the punitive approach. So that is something that we've been talking about in Senate Education. The other piece I want to mention more on an abstract level is that it is very difficult to legislate culture. It's not impossible, but it is very challenging. But one of the components to that is making sure that the conversations are at least happening, and that legislators are aware of it, and that these issues keep being brought to the forefront. I see this a lot in the Senate judiciary aspect of things, because people have been giving us a lot of questions about how we're going to respond to the federal government. There's a lot of things that we can't do, but there are absolutely a lot of things that we can make sure are at the forefront of our priorities and that we continue staying aware of. So, yeah.
I just want to add about the harms on kids of social media, and I am grateful that, I don't know how y'all feel, but how the schools actually voluntarily took cell phones out and before it was required. And the bill that we did a couple of years ago, Kids Code, it doesn't go into effect until this coming January, but it's just really critical, because that's one of the ways that kids are getting harmed, and they're intentionally getting harmed, and the social media companies know what they're doing. They don't even make a lot of money out of it. They value a kid's life at about $130. But that's what they make, and it results in suicide. I mean, it's really, really horrendous. So we are doing our best on that.
Any other comments?
I just want to say, first of all, Mary, thank you for bringing it up. No child should feel unsafe in school. Every school, regardless of laws, regardless of whether we're waiting to change laws to make it better, every school should be a welcoming place where a child feels safe, in a safe environment. If it's not happening, we can't wait to pass a law. You've got to go right to the process. The board, you should be asking your board, how often do you talk about culture in your school? And how often do you make it a priority to make sure children are feeling safe? We can't wait. We need to be moving forward on this no matter what. And I really appreciate the question and the focus on this.
I also appreciate the question, and one thing I'll point to, how do I think this will make, I'm not sure yet that we are there, but I think it's important for you all to understand that education policy cuts like no other policy in the State House. It does not cut along partisan lines. It is deeply personal to members, and at the end of the day, getting something passed is about math. It is about literally, do you have enough votes? And you have to count votes. One important provision that I'm a nonpartisan, I was pushing on when this came forward, much to the chagrin of folks on both sides, was around the inequities with private and public schools. And it's important to remember that education cuts like no other, and it does not follow partisan lines. And so if that provision had moved forward, it was promised that there would not be enough votes to move the bill if we were to hold private schools to the same standards that we hold public schools to. And so it's important to know that, because you can't deal with an issue if you don't understand it. So things are not predictable on education.
Ree? Sarah Kaltenbaugh, teacher here in the local district. I would urge you to keep thinking about pre-K and keeping that focused, because I am slightly terrified when our current kindergarten class gets to my classroom. We had 4 in our school meet benchmarks in the fall, which means 4 were ready for school. So that pre-K is super important. But as a teacher, I have a question about the class size minimums. I would assume that Brattleboro is not a sparse rural school and wouldn't be considered that. However, we do have classes that are smaller than the class size minimums. And what would happen to that extra teacher, for lack of better words, thinking about contracts, thinking about would they move to another school? Just curious as a teacher how that would play out.
So the sparse rural school definitions aren't actually related to class sizes. They're related to a particular grant funding mechanism. All those decisions are for the district to make, frankly. It's, we set guidance about class sizes based on grade. There are places where exceptions can be made. There's sort of a long ramp to get started with it. And then it's up to the district about how to best use staff from there.
And current contracts, would stay in place, or negotiated contracts, would stay in place if there was a change in staffing.
I see Jody's hand.
Can I respond
yes,
real quick?
You may.
One of the points of conversation in the Senate right now regarding class size minimums is figuring out the actual definitions as what is a class. Are we talking about a classroom or the full class of students, the group that's graduating? And the students per teacher, or are we counting para-educators as well? And so there is more clarification that we're trying to develop in the Senate and figure out if we need to change things around there.
Let's have Ruby go there, and then Jody, you're going to end us.
Hi, my name is Eleanor Thomas. I'm from Vernon. I'm curious, having an excellent education is so critical for every town and state of Vermont. It's why people move here, if we have a good educational system. But I'm curious, Vernon being somewhat of a rebel town, we have school choice, and how will that choice be impacted by the changes that we might be seeing?
I'd be happy to just attempt an answer. There may be a better one coming, but I spoke with the chair of education, who sits right behind me in the House, just this week about Vernon specifically. And I'm aware that Vernon has school choice, as do many schools, towns around the state. So it's a slightly complicated answer in the sense that I think the backdrop is that for Vermonters to provide equitable education, we need to provide Vermont's tax dollars to Vermont students. And so, and those dollars need to be spent in Vermont and our schools here in Vermont. So you already know, some of you probably know, that the list of schools that were receiving Vermont tax dollars last year is quite a different list than it is this year. And I think, what's the number, 25 or 35 schools now? 18 schools outside of Vermont, and they're all public schools, receive Vermont tax dollars. And so there was a pretty clear marking decision across the entire state that we are going to commit Vermont dollars to Vermont schools. Vernon has had school choice in the past. It no longer has that, except for the public school that's just south of Vernon. And that will, as far as I understand, will exist for a while until we make another decision about that. And I think that, speaking to Laura's question, there were certain stipulations about how many students need to be part of a student body in order to be able to qualify to receive those Vermont tax dollars, so that even school choice is limited actually inside of Vermont as well, so that certain schools which were inside Vermont, which were receiving tax dollars before, are no longer qualify to receive those dollars because they don't have enough Vermont students in them. Is that, am I saying it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to add sort of the extra clarification that we did not change anything in the governance sections of statute related to operating districts, non-operating districts, or school choice. That's still a decision of local voters, and for Windham Southeast and Windham Southeast District, Windham Southeast Supervisory Union, et cetera, all to negotiate amongst themselves. It's just that the schools that can receive those dollars from a tuitioning town is limited to schools that are sort of reaching scale of Vermont students. And in Vernon in particular, that tends to be public schools in the area. In other areas of the state, there are still independent schools that are operating at a scale with Vermont students that can receive those public dollars.
Thank you. And I also wanted to add that regarding the tuition rates, prior to Act 73, one of the challenges that was left on the shoulders of Vermont taxpayers was paying the tuition for private schools that moving forward is going to have to be equivalent to what will be paid out from the foundation formula. So what I mean by that is previously private schools could essentially bill a higher tuition compared to what a private payer would pay to go to that school, and that would be on the shoulders of taxpayers. But moving forward, they will be receiving the same tuition that that a public school would otherwise be receiving for that same student because of how the foundation formula is crafted. So hopefully I explained that correctly.
And frankly, actually, there are public high schools around the state that charge more in tuition to other districts than they spend on their own students. And that is also not allowed with the foundation formula.
Jody, and then did someone else have a hand up? Okay, we'll get there.
Jody Normandeau, Dummerston. This bill has a school construction thing in it, and I wanted to say that, or question, our district has been exceptional in keeping up with the school construction and keeping up our buildings and I think the administration is to be thanked for doing that. However, what happens when our district has done such a great job of keeping up and other districts really, really need to be kept up? So does that take away from us or does it not?
That's all on you.
Very philosophical question. No, it does not take away. So districts that have been spending money, whether that is bonded dollars or sort of pay-as-you-go dollars, are kept whole and covered under the new system. And districts that have not been able to persuade their voters of the need for that extra spending or districts that need to spend freshly because buildings have a life to them, or they see opportunity in, say, a regional high school, will have access to a new school construction program. We have not had a school construction program in Vermont for a very long time. And this one is going to be slightly different from the one we had before because we are so severely restricting how much districts can raise locally in order to maintain equity in the system. So it's going to be a combination of general obligation bonds issued by the state and then delivered to districts to cover part of the cost of a building, grants specifically from the education fund, to cover other costs of debt service under a bond, and then locally voted supplemental district spending at that local level. And in order to sort of access that sort of subsidized capital stack from the state, districts would need to work with the significant technical assistance that would be available from the School Construction Advisory Board and the School Construction Division at the Agency of Education for help identifying sort of best practices around contracting and siting and all the extra pieces that you need to do that well that I do not have the words for on a Saturday afternoon, but might have on a Tuesday.
In the back.
Go ahead, sure.
Hi, I'm Catherine Baldwin. I am a parent in Vernon. I am also on the school board. I just wanted to, so Act 73 changes are intended to create equity and opportunity for students, is what I'm hearing. School choice has allowed low-income and disadvantaged kids opportunities they would otherwise not have, like the school choice that we had. With school choice limits already being implemented, how are we going to ensure those kids don't lose opportunities while the full impact of Act 73 is realized? Because they've already started taking that away from kids, but I hear that a lot of Act 73, the things that are going to create the equity, haven't been decided yet. So how are we going to make sure that all these kids that now no longer have these opportunities are going to not miss out on some things while we're trying to get the schools up to, the districts all up to where we want them to be? And then someone had made a comment about the private schools charging more. I mean, I imagine there's probably some schools that take advantage of the school of choice amounts. I know personally, my two oldest had the opportunity to go to some different schools. We tried a bunch of different schools because of the school of choice for them to find what worked best for them. And it actually saved our town money because those schools charged far less than what the tuition rate was. So that's concerning that the way we decided to deal with that was just to get rid of the option for everybody instead of dealing with bad actors.
Any comments?
I'll speak to one piece of equity when I think about lower income kids and school choice. I have a really dear friend who lives right outside of Rutland in a school choice district. She's recently single. She has 2 little boys. And for high school, she needs her kids need to be tuitioned to an independent school. They're in addition to the amount that her town pays or her school district pays for her kids to go to that school, she also needs to pay $4,000 out of pocket for the school bus. She needs to pay $4,000 out of pocket for school lunches. And then sometimes she can get financial aid to cover the extra $4,000 of tuition. But the school bus and the school lunch is never covered by her community and always needs to come out of pocket. And the financial aid for that extra $4,000, she sometimes can't access because her ex won't fill out the financial aid paperwork. And that's just like one of many stories of what happens sometimes when we're not being vigilant about making sure that opportunities are equitable around the state. One of the reasons that we reduced the schools that can receive public dollars was to move towards a system where the independent schools that are still receiving public dollars are really fully brought into the system because the majority of them are receiving, the majority of the students in that school are receiving public dollars. And so that is the path that we're on now. And in the meantime, as sort of schools come, there are really great opportunities for public schools in Southeast Vermont for kids to go to, whether they're being tuitioned there or they're in a fully operating district.
And I'll just add, if I wasn't sure if this was your question, but Act 73, when we changed the what schools qualified for tuition in state public dollars, any child who's already in the system will stay in the school that they're in until they graduate. So I just want to make sure everyone understood that, if that was your question. And I'll just say one other thing. Poor Dan has heard this a million times, so has Rich. But I've been championing all along that choice is a wonderful concept, but choice is only available to some people. And we have often seen students who, we always know that there's kids who cannot take advantage of choice, even when it's there for them. And what I want to make sure that we do is we make every single child have access to that high quality education in the schools that they are able to go to in the state.
I do realize that the kids get to stay in the school they're in if they were already in there. I'm talking about the kids that are in 6th grade this year, their choices for next year. The Act 73 hasn't been realized yet. All the equity and the equal opportunity we're talking about, that is not available yet. And so we're forcing this year's 6th graders and maybe the next 2 or 3 years of 6th graders to, at least in Vernon and maybe other schools, it's different grades, to go into schools that don't have the opportunities that they could have had, had they been a 6th grader last year. They're going to miss out on a ton of opportunities. And for me, that's personal because I have a 5th grader who watched his sisters get opportunities that they really needed as they failed in the schools, the local schools in this area, both of them for different reasons. And they went to different school choice schools that we were able to find them the right fit. And he doesn't have any of those choices. And there's some things that we're having to look at that he's not going to get, that he desperately needs, that is not available now that some of the schools have been taken off the list for him. And there's other kids in that same position that those things aren't going to be in place until Act 73 is fully realized. And that's going to be 3 to 5 years from now. So what about those kids, the next 3 to 5 years for those 6th graders or 8th graders, that's not going to happen for them?
We have come to the end of our time today. I would like to thank, on behalf of the WSESD and WSESU boards, thank all you legislators for coming. Thank you for listening, and thank you for doing what you're doing. Also, big thanks to BCTV for filming us today, and to the school staff for setting things up. Thank you. With that, to the public, I would say please stay in touch with your legislators, and also stay in touch with your school board members. They are a wealth of knowledge, and the more they know that you are watching, the better they will do. So thank you and have a good afternoon.